Welcome to Between Authors. I'm your host, author Adrian Lopez. What is it that excites us as a reader? It's finding that book or author that you may never have heard of, sort of like the treasure hunt as a reader. The goal from my podcast is to bring to you either those books or authors that you may never have found, but may be the treasure you've been hunting for all along. Today in episode 42, I bring to you Arthur Avalos. We're going to talk a little bit about who he is, what he's published, what he's working on, and maybe what his plans are for the future. Welcome to the show, Arthur.
Hey, how are you? How's it going?
I'm doing great. Happy to have you here today.
Thank you. No, thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't you, let's begin by doing an introduction to you, to the viewers, and kind of give us a little background about you.
Yeah. So my name's Arthur. I go by Artie on a lot of my social medias, but my full name is Author Avalos. By day, I'm a therapist, and then for fun, I do a lot of reading and writing and just kind of like having fun, Yeah, I love to also like read and write in the horror genre. So like that's primarily, if you ever see me with a book, that's probably what I'm doing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's my favorite genre as well. So that's good. That's great to know on that side.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about what influences you creatively? And again, it doesn't have to necessarily be books and authors.
Yeah, I would say honestly, like pop culture really influences me a lot. And anything about pop culture. Like even in my debut book, I reference like different things of pop culture. Like one of my favorite shows right now is like RuPaul's Drag Race. I've been following it since like day one. And so in my book, I mentioned the show. Music really influences me just creatively, and it's just like my happy place. So something like even just like getting in the car and just driving and listening to music is inspiration. And even when I write, I don't write and listen to like music with lyrics. I'll listen to like classical and stuff like that. But leading up to like when I'm outlining and stuff, I got like music always going. So music influences me, pop culture, probably the biggest things that influence me.
Yeah, I think music's probably a big one for pretty much most of us, right? Even though, and most of us maybe don't realize how much it does influence what we do, but it really is, because music is again an art form, kind of like writing, that it's all about emotion, right? That connection to the song that pulls you in. Have you? I know one of the big things nowadays is a playlist that goes along with your book or goes along maybe even with the chapters. Is that something you did, or did you stay away from that side of it?
So I stayed away from it, but I thought about it more towards like actually when I was done writing the book, I was like, ooh, I should have did that, because I do reference a song in the book in the beginning, which after I wrote it, I was like, oh, I should have like done that. I'm definitely going to actually do that with the next project that I do work on. I do want to have a playlist go with it, because music is going to be kind of a central theme, not a central theme, but it's going to tie into the characters. I think the characters will be connected with that. So
yeah, I mean, I don't know, because I didn't do a playlist either for my stuff, but I would think maybe you probably still could, because I know a lot of the authors did it a couple of different ways, right? In the book, there may be a link in the book saying go here for the playlist, or I know some of them just put it on their own website or a linktree or whatever. So it's probably something you still could do and say, playlist that goes along with their book or something. But I think it's a great idea. It's something I never even thought about until I started hearing about it and seeing it.
Yeah, it's become very popular. I have a friend who, a couple friends. I have a friend who's writing a series, and he has one for each book. And he kind of designed it based off of like to coincide maybe with the chapters. And then I have another friend, her playlist is connected to what she listened to when she wrote it. So it's just awesome how everybody's like using that. And I think it's a genius marketing tool though.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah, because it ties it all in together. And I know like if you got popular artists on the playlist, like that's also pretty cool and helpful. So, I mean, there's still time. I got another month. I think I got a counter. I got 48 days. So I have time to maybe do it if I wanted to.
Yeah, it is very interesting, because really music is that international language, right? It really is. something that transcends, language itself or countries or anything, right? It's something that universally is understood. And the beauty of it really is, like you said, is that the way you can interpret it either way, right? Like one of the authors you mentioned, she put the playlist based on what she listened to the chapter. So kind of what her mindset was as she wrote these chapters, where other ones may do a playlist that kind of goes along with what's happening in the chapter. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, and like you said, music, it's like that universal language because it's probably the oldest form of storytelling, maybe, when you think about it. Like a lot of like ancient cultures, things like that, they used music as ways to tell stories and pass things on, so it's that universal language, and like it connects everybody. And it's like I always think of Dolly Parton too whenever I think of like good storytelling with music. She's like the master of that. So like
Yeah, it really goes back. There's another author I interviewed, Olivia Linden, and she does a lot of her stories are kind of tied into old 90s R&B, which is, some of the stuff I listen to a lot. But it's really interesting because when you really go further back, right, you go into the old R&B from the 70s, 80s, country music, even go back to the old crooners from the 40s and 50s, all those songs were stories, right? It was a really small short story they kind of told, and it does really correlate with writing, right? It's very interesting how those really intertwine when you think about it.
And that's why I think of like Taylor Swift. I know she's like super popular, like there's always like back and forth, but she's like also one that's like mastered storytelling in music, know. So yeah, I love it.
It's very interesting how that's kind of picked up, and I really do enjoy it. I really do like that whole trend of doing that with the book. But let's talk about your book. Let's talk about Something Happened. I know it's going to release on April 9th.
Yes.
And we are shooting this episode before, but this will probably air a little bit after the book's release. But why don't you give a short summary or synopsis about what the book is about?
The way I've kind of been pushing it is Something Happened is a psychological thriller with horror elements and a dash of slash. It brings you back to those like 90s, 80s, 90s slasher movies and books where like there's something happening in the woods and camping. But the story follows a dysfunctional family. And one night at dinner, one of the family members tells one of their secrets, and the secret does not go well over with the family. And then from there, like dynamics were already shaky beforehand. Different family members had secrets and lies. But after that night, things really started to change, especially with the main character after his secret comes out. And then from there, it kind of like you learn a little bit more of them. But basically, they always used to go on these vacations. When they were younger, they used to go camping. But as the family evolved and the dad became successful at his business, they stopped going camping and they would do more lavish vacations. Well, everybody in the family knows that the family's dysfunctional. And this year, it's one of the daughters' turn to pick. And she's like, you know what? I want to fix this family. Let's go camping. And they go back to the roots of like their camping trips when they were younger. And that's when all of the other secrets that everybody's had going on kind of come out. Not everybody makes it out of the woods alive. So that's where the horror slasher element comes in. But hopefully, it's a wild ride, I think.
Yeah, it sounds great. I mean, I love the dash of slash, right?
Yeah.
That's perfect. That's a perfect term. I have another author friend that also writes horror, and she always likes to, when she talks about her book, she's like, it has a little sprinkle of murder, just a little bit of murder in the back.
Yeah, I know. I've been telling my partner, I was like, I'm gonna get shirts that say a dash of slash.
You might as well stickers. Yeah. You just get the stickers, the whole thing. I mean, that's the way to go.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like
that's great. I love that.
Yeah.
So is horror basically the genre you love? I mean, does it go back? For me, it goes back to movies, right? But is it the genre that really you pretty much only read, you're going to write pretty much going forward in, or do you have a couple other genres that you kind of sprinkle in here and there when you're reading, or maybe right in the future.
Yeah, well, horror plays a big part. It's always played a big part of my life, like horror movies and all that. So I think at its core, horror is probably going to be my heart, and I'm always going to probably write in it. In this book, I dabble with a romance in it. So the book doesn't have romance in it, but the main character has like a love interest in there. But I've always loved horror. It's been part of my life. My mom and I would go watch every horror movie that ever came out.
Yeah.
And primarily, I would say like maybe 50% of what I read is horror, and then it goes 25% thriller, and then 25% everything else. So I do read everything, but horror is the big one. Yeah, that's where you find me mainly.
Yeah, and it's interesting, really, because when you think about it, I mean, every book, no matter what it is, it's multiple genres, right? It's your main core genre, say horror, but there's elements of thriller, could be elements of fantasy, could be elements of romance. I mean, there's all these little subgenres that every book fits in. So it's always, I always like asking that question to just get an interest of where the author thinks they'll go at some point, because sometimes they don't even realize they're writing in some of these other subgenres for the most part, and it's really not that big of a stretch to kind of move over and just maybe go with a romance with horror elements instead of a horror with romance elements into it.
Yeah, I actually have an idea going for like a horror themed romance, like really taking the two genres and having them equal central focal points, where it's horror, but the romance is just as equal as the horror, or as equal as the horror. So it's an idea, one of many.
Yeah, it's interesting because I wrote, I mean, my first book I wrote was just a short story that's only an ebook.
Mm-hmm.
And my whole life I've written poetry, right? So I write a lot of poetry, and at some point I may release a poetry collection. I've been thinking about it.
Yeah.
But a lot of my poetry is centered on love, right? It's centered on the loss of love, finding love or being that moment in love.
Yeah.
And same thing I was really thinking about, because again, horror is what I really enjoy and really want to stay in. But I did have an idea of like a creepy paranormal romance short story I was thinking of, and tying in my poetry side for like the love letter part of the story, but then just bringing all that horror and stuff and elements into it. And it's exciting when you start thinking of that, because you can really pull all those different elements into that as you're writing those stories.
Yeah, that's the one thing I love about writing, is that, like, just exactly like you said, like if it's paranormal horror, but then like you got poetry that could be letters between people, like you see all this cross genres. One of my favorite authors, I love her because she kind of has been crossing genres, even just in the mainstream traditional space. She's released thrillers, she's released a romance, she's doing like an apocalyptic romance. I'm just like, who are you? You're just like writing all this, and you're doing it all. And that's kind of where I see myself in the future, though, because I read everything. Like I actually just finished 2 YA romance books back to back, so I am all over it. I would love to dabble in like do a romance, and I would love to do, just a psychological thriller minus the horror elements, but I do love mixing it all together, and I think as a therapist, that's also why I like to mix it, because like people are complex, and so stories should represent that too.
Yeah, I mean, really, that's a good point, because really, it's something I mentioned a lot on here, but I always like to talk about the author's voice, right? Your own unique voice, and it's everything that makes up you as a person, right? And it goes back to what influences you in music, what influenced you in movies, as you grew up, experiences, everything you've gone through is what makes your voice unique, right? And that's the beauty of being an indie author and self-published, is you have no limits, right? You do whatever you want.
Yeah.
And there is no right or wrong, right? There is no right or wrong there. And the downside of traditional publishing, and you get all the arguments from, you see all these videos of people arguing, which is stupid. But the downside of traditional is you lose that control. You really don't have 100% control.
Yeah.
Because they may say, oh, we love this story, but we kind of like this. and you got to kind of do it, right? And then that's no longer your voice. I mean, it's mostly your voice, but it's no longer your unique voice, right? And that is the beauty of being an indie author. You can do anything you want. You can write it any way you want. You can come from any point of view you want. You can do it however you want. And there will always be an audience for your voice. Now, what we all struggle with is finding that audience. They're there, but can we find them, right? Can we get the eyes on our product? That's the big struggle where we move forward with it. But it's the beauty really of this whole thing, which is why I just love this. And why I try to do as much as I can to support other indie authors is because I love when people do things differently, right? I love when you don't follow the norm and you basically honor your own heart and soul and say, I want to do it this way and I want to do it this way. That's a beautiful thing. And I love supporting that always.
No, I had that question in the beginning. A lot of people had asked after I finished the story or as I was getting ready to finish, they're like, are you going to try to query? Are you going to try and do the traditional route? And I thought about it for a while, but one thing that kind of swayed me to wanting to do indie is the fact that I didn't want to lose my voice. And there's a popular traditionally published author that just recently got traditionally published, and their backlog category is coming out and they're releasing more stuff. But I've seen feedback where like, oh, their most recent books under the traditional side have sounded and felt different. And that to me, I was like, oh, that's what I'm always afraid of, is losing my voice. And so, and that's what I hear from a lot of traditionally published people, authors, is that like sometimes you do lose a little bit of it. There are a lot of like, even Control, one of the authors I follow and I struck up a friendship with, he was telling me, he's like, yeah, they wanted me to change my book title. He's like, and I did not want to do that. And I was like, no, that's, like we create this story, we create these details and we want to release it that way, and like, yes, it's great to have feedback, but like when our voices changed, or if like the title of my book, Something Happened, literally ties in everybody's story. And at its core, something happened to every single one of them that drew them to where they're at, and then obviously something happens in the woods and all that stuff. So like I can't imagine like if I was traditionally releasing this and somebody said, we don't like the title, I'd be like, but that means so much to me, because like it literally is at its core relates to every character and it makes sense.
It's a hard thing to explain, probably for either side, right? Really, to explain the point of view from your side, right, towards the other. But it's really the thing I've always tried to make sure it's understood is, when you do query, when you don't get picked or you get declined, it's never against your skill or talent, right? No. And I always try to get them to remember, you're trying to get one person to accept it, right? One person's reading that, and you're trying to get, and you're never going to get 100% of people to like what you do. It's just not going to happen. So you shouldn't feel bad or get down when that one person doesn't like it, right? And it could be that maybe they're overloaded already in what you write, and they're like, well, I liked it, but I can't do it, so it's a decline. And it's never a point against your skill or talent. And that's, I hate seeing a lot of the authors get down and they get sad, and you're like, it has nothing to do with how good you are, because, there's that one video going around TikTok where that crazy lady says the book was horrible, and she goes, oh, why? I see that it was indie published and it makes sense. And it's like, it's ridiculous, that point of view, because all the indie authors I've met on all these social medias, right, Twitter, TikTok, whatever, read their books, listened to their stories, man, they're all so super talented. And it has nothing to do with whether you're traditionally published or not, right? It's just such a bad take that some of those people really stand behind on that side.
Yeah, because like you said, it just depends on whose desk it's going across, what that person's looking for. I always reference Alex Astor. She's the author of Nightbane and Lightlark. She queried like 50 times and got 50 no's. She went on TikTok, talked about her book. Somebody reached out to her. The day she signed the deal, they pitched her book and then she got movie deals from it. So it just needed to go in the right hands. But she had 50 no's. She had 50 people telling her no, like literally no. And then she goes on TikTok, somebody sees her there and is like, I like that story. She wasn't even done with the book when it actually got picked up to be a movie. So, and then I think it's being published by the same people who did like Twilight and Hunger Games or things like that. So it just has to hit the right people,
That's all it is. And that tells you, did her talent or skill change? No, right? It was the same story. Nothing changed. But yeah, it's just I hate seeing that when you get to see some of them, get so down and they don't get picked up and they just, they start taking it to heart that maybe it's not good enough. And it's just, it's horrible to see that because it's really has nothing to do with talent. Yeah. But it's interesting because I had interviewed an author actually a while back ago, and he was I think a screenwriter for a long time, and he was going to do a book, and it was traditionally published, right? And he wrote the whole story, and he says that the guy that he was supposed to take it to was like, he was like in his 40s or something. And the guy who was giving it to was like 23, just graduated, right? And he's reading his story and he's like, peacocks are big right now. You should have a peacock in your book, right? The author's like, my story takes place in downtown Philadelphia. Where am I going to put a peacock in this story? So it just tells you again, there's sometimes they're not even reading the story. They just have these keywords that they have in their mind. And they're like, your book needs to have this. And it's like, did you even read the story? Do you even know what it's about?
Yeah. Actually, there's another author on TikTok. They've been traditionally published and they give out a lot of advice, Danielle Valentine. I love following her. She's big influence and gives really good advice. But she had mentioned that sometimes, it's like the people who are the agents and stuff, they're looking for certain things. And so you could even go to some of these query websites and kind of look and see like what's popular right now. Like this year, dragons. So if you started to write a dragon book and you can pump it out in 6 months, you might get published this year because that's what's hot, So it's like, it's just keyword.
But then that's not your voice, right? And then that goes back to again, you go down the road of not really letting your voice speak? And you just want to be out there and published, or do you really just want let your voice do what it wants to do? And it's a hard decision, right? It's very difficult, and everybody needs to make that decision which direction they really want to go with.
Yeah, that's why I have a list of all the things that I love that I want to write, and so it's just like, hey, if that becomes popular,
you're ready to go.
Pull out that idea,
You're just like, I'm going to move this one up and start doing this one.
Like, I was eventually going to do it, but I'm just pushing it up the ladder,
That's not a bad idea, actually. So let's go back to your book. Something happened. Did you have a favorite scene in the book?
I think I did have a favorite scene. It's a pretty intense emotional scene between the mother in the story and then the kids when they gather. Like on the cover of the book, you see like the image of like water in a creek. The scene that takes place there is very emotional. And that was like probably my favorite scene because I had to tap into like, what would a mother feel? Like I thought about what my mom would feel in those moments when all the chaos is there and stuff like that. And then just like a mother's strength, saying goodbye, doing, just the hard stuff. A few people who kind of worked with me, like my beta readers or like ARC readers, that scene also to them stuck out. So I think that probably my favorite scene, even though it's horror thriller, it's kind of a sad scene. I actually had one of the beta readers text me and they're like, you broke me. I'm like crying right now. I was like, okay. I was like, I guess that's good. But that's my favorite.
You're like, I'm sorry, but when you turn around, you're like, yes, I did.
Yeah, every time they text me, when someone's reading it, they're just like, oh my God. And I'm like, yes, you got it. Like, that's exactly what I wanted you to feel. Like, you hate that character? Oh, I wanted you to hate that character.
Yeah. And it's really, again, it's a very good point because it really goes back to that connection to the reader, right? if you're writing it and you're feeling all those emotions, you're feeling that hatred for that character, right? You're feeling the anger, you're feeling the sadness, then that's going to connect with the reader, right? And the reader is going to do it. And that's, again, it's such a beautiful thing when that happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. So on the opposite side of that, did you have a hard scene in the book?
I don't. That's a good question, because I don't think. I think the scene that maybe I struggled with was wrapping it up. I knew how I wanted to wrap it up. I knew all of like what was gonna happen. Just making sure that it flowed the way I wanted it to flow.
Yeah.
And that it was as plausible as I wanted it to be. You know, I didn't want it to be like, oh, that can't happen, or this could happen. And then making sure like a few things that did happen there, it's like, did I make sure I set that up so that it made sense? You know, because I didn't want it to be like something that was like plucked out of thin air. I wanted it to be like, oh, wait a minute, you need to make sure if that's going to happen, then you make a reference earlier somehow, or drop that little Easter egg. So again, it's not like just pulled out of nowhere. So I think that like, I would say it was difficult in the sense, challenging to make sure I hit those points, you know, to make sure like I didn't miss something.
Yeah. Another question is a little different, but before the other couple of questions, is this storyline, how did this come to you? My book came to me as an image. I saw an image in my mind, and it led me to a scene and to the story, right? How did this story come to you? How did you come about, you know, thinking about this?
So the journey to this book was interesting. So I unexpectedly lost my mom at the end of 2022. And
sorry.
Yeah, it was very tragic. I was like on vacation when it happened. So like it's really out of the blue. But when I decided that I wanted to write something, I had other ideas that I was thinking of, but I just kept going back to this idea of like, I want to honor my mom in some way, and I want to write this for her. And I was like, what would she want to read? She loved going camping. Like, we had a camper and everything growing up. And so like, that was her happy place. So I was like, this story has to have that element in camping in it for her. Like, literally every other idea was thrown out the window. And so it kind of like formed from that, just from like wanting to honor her, that memory, and what we used to do as a family. And obviously we don't go like killing each other in the woods. Like, our family,
nothing you can talk about, right?
Yeah, no. Right. So I was just like, but how do I twist this and do what I love, you know? And then also, like, again, my mom, we would, anytime a horror movie came out, we were like texting each other, did you watch it? Are we gonna go watch it together? So I was like, I have to write a horror slasher, what we would love. And it's funny because my mom wasn't a reader, but I know she would have read this one. And so I was like, this really was designed for her if she would be here still. So that's kind of how it grew. And then, you know, just pulling from there's a scene in the book. I told my sister, I was like, the two characters have this scene in there, and when you read this, you're gonna die laughing, because like it actually happened to us when we were kids. So she's like, oh, I can't wait to read it. So it's cool. So that's how the story was born.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry for your loss, man, but I love that you did that, right? I love that you took experience of the camping, right, which was your family experience and memory, and you took the love of horror that you both have, and that's just a great way to honor her memory and put it in the book that way. It's just it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. No, I'm so proud of it. And the character's mom in the book, at her heart and soul in the book, she's modeled after my mom too, like that mother that's everybody's mother type thing. So it's it's all about her.
That's beautiful. Well, let's go back to the book. Did you do any specific research for this book?
I did some research. It's tough because it's not tough, but since I'm a therapist, one of the things that I was tackling as going into the book was I wanted to write each character with a little bit of some sort of like mental health struggle they were going with. So one of the characters might be a little narcissistic. So I had to go back to make sure like is this something somebody that a narcissist would do and say and act, and how would they want to manipulate and control the dynamics within the family, and then also like anxiety a little bit, and then a little bit of PTSD and trauma from another character and disassociation tendencies. So I would say like, yeah, I did some research in making sure like, am I accurately portraying this the best that I remember from school, like, and all that kind of stuff. So there was some of that type of thing, research in there. And then, yeah, I would probably say like for this book, that's probably all the research I did, but I'm working on something else that I'm doing a deeper dive into research, because I want to make sure the next thing I work on, I'm tackling it from different angles. And so I have to do research around that one. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a great way to tie in, you know, what your career is into the storyline. It's a great way to think about and you know, do the kind of the background of the characters in that direction.
Yeah, and I think that's probably going to be something that'll always be a central theme in my books, is like mental health. Not a central theme, but like every character, when I'm developing them, I'm attaching some sort of mental health concern to the character, because I think it adds like some depth, and then you can really take that and run with that. One of my favorite authors on TikTok, Lucinda Berry, she's actually a child psychologist, and when you read her books, you can totally see, like, as a therapist, I read it and I'm like, she nailed this. Like, I could tell this is her day job, and that inspires me to want to put that in my stories as well.
Yeah, it's always, again, there's always such a connection when you can pull those, right? When you can pull your experiences, things you know, and maybe it's not the complete part of the story, but we can pull that into it. It just makes everything so much more realistic as you're writing it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So when this book comes out, I'm assuming this would be a standalone, right? So this is a standalone story?
Maybe. It is. So
it's hard to answer, right? It always is.
I guess so. When I wrote it, it was always intended to be a standalone. And then as I got halfway through, I was like, I could take this further. This could be multiple books. So in my head, as of today, there are 3 books that this can potentially be. And it kind of takes on the slasher element and like the nod to like I Know What You Did Last Summer and Scream and all that, where you can continue it. And there are Easter eggs in there that I started to intentionally put. So really, I will write another one if the demand is there, if people like it, if they want to know if they want to see. I end the story in a way where you literally are like, okay, well, what did that say? What happened? Like, I had some of the readers, the beta and ARC readers, are just like, please tell me that this continues, because you literally just ended that. And I was like, well, that's how a lot of slashers in the 80s and 90s end sometimes. You know, I mean, what is it? Nightmare on Elm Street. You know, you think it's over, and then the mother or whoever gets dragged back through at that last second, you're like, it's not over. That my ending kind of has that moment of, this might not be the end. But again, I'm waiting I know what I want to write next, and I didn't want to write the sequel to this book next. I have this other idea that's been cooking. Yeah. So I'll revisit it depending on like if people want to see, the main character's name is Jason. If they want to see Jason and whoever survives, if they want to see Jason and whoever survives, if they want to see what happens next. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I like the fact that you're doing the honoring the 80s and 90s slasher, the way you approached it. I mean, that's something similar to what I did. Is all of my horror books, I want my covers to always give you that old 50 horror poster look that you used to see on the theaters. I want all my covers to look like that, right? No matter what the story is, I'm always going to aim that cover in that direction, because I just always loved that artwork, right? I love those approaches that they used to do. Were beautiful posters the way they used to do those for horror. So I want my covers to always look like that. That's going to be my thing, right? That's going to be the way I do all my horror books. So I do appreciate when you do that, and you kind of pay homage to some of those old genres or styles. It's great.
Yeah, and the person I worked with to do the cover, he's a really good friend and a fellow indie author on TikTok, Brandon T. Bernard. He is the author of the Mad World series, but he really captured everything I wanted in the book. And I had sent the images to another author, Christopher M. Tantillo, on TikTok, and I was like, what do you think about this? He's like, why is this giving me those 80s, 90s, like, Goosebump vibes? You know, I was like, those were my favorite books growing up. I was like, do not know how much that means to me hearing you say, like, that's what it reminds you of, because that's the vibes and stuff I was going for. So, yeah.
One of the other TikTokers on there, Cynthia Reeds, I think is her account. She said that about mine too. She said it gave her the Goosebump vibes, and it's a little later than I was going for, but Goosebumps really kind of was going after those old poster kind of styles. So it really fit right in, right? It fits in the style that I was going for.
Yeah. And I think that's something I also always want to do is capture my influences, because I think what it's going to do is going to, like, people who read my book, and if they get those references, or if, you know, during interviews, things like that, I mentioned that, they're going to go back and look at some of those classics, you know, and they're going to go revisit some of that stuff. And they're just going to, like, it's going to be like,
a lot of those old ones deserve it, right? They deserve to be seen for the first time, because a lot of people haven't seen some of those older ones. And, you know, it really goes back to, I always like to say, were they all great movies? No, but they were just some of the best entertainment to watch, right? And if you've seen it for the first time, you're going to fall in love with it, because there's just something about them, right? Something about you that pulls you in.
Yeah, exactly. I always watch the movies now and I'm like, man, like, this is so poorly done, but I love it. Like, you know, like, I was watching one of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. I was like, oh, this is so cheesy and bad, like the blood and guts. But I was just like, I love it. Give me more.
Yeah, I know. So, you know, you mentioned that you're working on something now that, in case you did book 2, right? You're putting something in the middle. Do you want to talk about that at all? And again, I don't want you to give more than you're really comfortable with.
Yeah, I'm bad at secrets. So if you follow me on TikTok, like, I've already, you know, spoiled the name and everything like that. But I'm working on a piece. I'm working on a novella as well as another novel. I'm mapping out the novel now, and the novella is kind of already cooked up, and I know what's happening with it. I'm excited for the novella because the novella kind of, okay, so the story and the novella have nods in this book too. They make an appearance somewhere. So when those come out, then you'll see the connection, and it'll be kind of awesome. But I'm working on a novella called 13 Hours, where this girl kind of wakes up in this room, and she doesn't know how she got in there, but she's kind of chained to the floor, and the room's bare. And she has 13 hours to figure out why she's in the room. And if she can guess how she got in the room and who put her there, that person will let her out. Every hour, the person who captured her comes back and gives her a clue. And then for the book, I kind of tied in some, like, religious references and stuff, in terms of, like, how the chapters are going to flow and things like that. So I'm really excited about that, because it's gonna take shape. I'm even changing the way I write it. Like, Something Happened was written in first person, multiple POV. This is gonna be written in third person, single POV. And then the full novel I'm working on deals with kind of like the occult and possessions. And all my books have queer themes in them. So the novel I'm working on next, I already know what it's called. It's called My Boyfriend's Exorcism. And it literally is going to be, like, again, like, kind of modeled after, like, some of the 90s type vibes. But it's going to deal with the occult. So I'm in that plotting and planning stage and trying to get, like, my research together, so that I can, like, nail it. And then I also, I grew up, I didn't grow up religious, but I grew up going to, like, Catholic schools. So in the back of my head, there's always, like, some stuff like that there. And I'm pulling some references here and there, for, like, chapter headings and things like that. So that's actually been a fun process to kind of map out and plan, as I go through that. But those are, like, the two main things I'm working on, as well as, like, I've been working on a short story collection, and a poetry collection, which is probably, like, always going to be in the works. That's probably, like, a 2025, 2026 thing. But yeah.
Yeah. Sound very similar to me. Just all these things going on at the same time.
Yeah, I got like 6 files in my cloud, and they already got titles, they got the synopsis, they got everything to go. So it's one of those things, like I said, I got my list. So if something's popular, I'm like, hey, let's go for it.
Yeah, it was I don't outline, I don't plan, because it's something I've always done, even when I, my day job and my work. A lot of the stuff I just do in my head, right? So a lot of it's there in my head, and I don't technically put it on paper, right? Yeah. Is it the right way to do it? No, but it works for me the way my mind works. It works perfectly, right? It comes out organized somehow, right?
Yeah.
How it happens, I don't know very so much. But one of the things I did, and it's interesting you mentioned that, one of the things I did do is when I was writing my werewolf book, I titled every chapter, and the chapter titles were really my keyword of what I wanted to happen in that chapter. Yeah. So that was technically like my outline, because I would name every chapter in between, maybe because I did not write it chronologically. I wrote a lot of big scenes I wanted to happen and then built it in between and around. But I would use the chapter titles as my keyword to kind of pull out that file out of my head. This is what I wanted to happen in here. And it worked great for me. Again, would I suggest that to anybody else? No. Yeah. But it was a good way to kind of organize it for me to be able to pull it through.
Yeah, that's kind of like how why I wanted to do that for this one I'm working on now, the novel. Like part 1 is literally called Pestilence, which is like the beginning in biblical terms. And I'm just like, that's how I tie things in. And so like when I'm plotting, I was like, okay, I got to make sure in this part 1 of the book, we're talking about what happens in the beginning. We're setting the stage. And there's a part 3 or 4, I think is called Last Rites, things like that there where, it's kind of like telling you kind of, and in my head, as I'm like plotting and planning it, I'm actually like thinking of like, because my partner's like, are you planning this like it's a movie? I was like, in my head, I'm seeing, how sometimes those movies, the screen will go blank and you'll just see like the title and it says, and then this, in my head, that's literally how the chapters are playing out. So I'm like, no, like I'm writing this like how I'm seeing it in my head as a movie. So, but 90s movies, yeah.
It's interesting. That's the way I write as well. I don't know if it goes back to our love for horror genre. Maybe it's because our love for that's how we pull through it. But I do the same thing. And I just did an interview the other day for my book, and the one that was interviewing me had read the book, and he was like, now that I think about it, he goes, your book is written like a movie. He goes, basically your book takes you through, the opening act throughout the movie. And he goes, it's almost like the screenplay is set up. You just somebody would have to clean it up for a movie a little bit, but it's like you wrote it like you're watching a movie. And I go, that's how I see it, right? I see it like I'm watching, the movie go along, and that's how it comes out to me. That's how I write it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the main reasons why I'm doing also so much plotting though ahead of time is like I'm so limited on time. I'm like, in order for me to make sure I don't miss something, I gotta have a place for this to sit. So when I go to sit, because my plan is hopefully to plot the entire book out through the month of March as I'm finishing getting ready to launch Something Happened. And then once Something Happens done, I'm giving myself 3 months to write the story. But everything will be plotted out ahead of time that hopefully those 3 months I can get the actual like story done. And then from there, you know how it goes, editing after editing.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Yeah. I mean, time and funds are usually, an indie author's struggles, right? But it is, you have to find creative ways, because if you have maybe an hour slot, you want to be using as much of that hour as actual writing rather than 15, 20 minutes thinking about what you want to write. You would hope that at least 50 of those minutes, you're on it, right? You're just trying to get as much on there. So you have to start getting creative when you only have 20 minutes here, an hour here. You got to, hit it running right away to get that out there.
Yeah, I got notes on my phone. I got like documents here, and then I do voice notes when I have a whole book voice note. It's like 10 minutes where I was sitting at the bus one time and a story came to me and I was just like, No, we're documenting this because this is gonna that one also is something that's plotted out that I'm hoping to work on next year if I don't jump back to something happened again.
Yeah, it's funny. I did a TikTok question the other day, maybe like a day or so ago, and I commute right now to work like 2 hours each way, right? Luckily, I only work in the office twice a week.
Yeah.
But I lose 4 hours a day those 2 days. And I put a question on TikTok. I was like, does anybody use the actual transcribing voice apps on the phone where I can just use the 2 hours to basically write while I'm talking, and hopefully it's all in text and I can just clean it up after, because I hate losing those 4 hours because I'm on the road. There's nothing else I could do.
Yeah.
I might as well just sit there and hopefully, for most of that, do a chapter or two or a couple of chapters, and then go back and clean it up later. So that's, again, you have to get creative when you have the limited time and try to take advantage of it.
Yeah, like you said, time and funds are Indy's nightmare.
Yep. So you have something happen. You have the next book that you're releasing, 13 Hours. Then you have My Boyfriend's Exorcism, which either could be the third or maybe the fourth, depending if you go back to book 2 or you even do book 2.
Yeah.
Say you get through these, right? Say you get through kind of your checklist right now.
Yeah.
Future wise, there's something you want to tackle down the line or something you really want to do. And you touched a little bit of maybe at some point a poetry collection. But is there something further down the line that you thought of and said, I'd really, at the end of the day, would really like to attempt this or tackle this at some point in my writing career?
Yes, there's a really big project that probably would be multi-years in the making, but I want to write a fantasy series, and I actually have the idea somewhat cooked up already. It would be a 4-book fantasy series with a 2-book spinoff to explain this other side to stuff, and then a standalone to kind of tell another story. But I want to write this fantasy kind of universe story. I love vampires, dragons, and witches, and that's the central theme of what all of them would be. And then obviously I was like, well, I need to tell the backstory of the the vampires. So there's the duology. And then I was like, but then these witches need a backstory as to why that happened. So the idea has been formulating. I'm trying to clean up the idea, but it really, that's like a big goal and project would be to tackle fantasy. But I see that as probably I would probably tackle that in 5 years. I want to get some more stuff under my belt first.
Yeah, so we can look forward, say 6-7 years, your box collection on TikTok Shop to get all the books together for the fantasy series.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, I loved having you on today. I love the conversation, going over your book and everything. I really love supporting indie authors, and I love doing this podcast for this reason, because when the viewers get to see the author, right, get to see the author's personality, why they wrote the story, why they enjoy doing this, and all those parts of it, it really strengthens the connection to the reader, right? It really gives the reader a reason to go check out those books, to go check out your work and get you out there, right? And that's basically what all of this is try to get more eyes on your product and on your work.
Yeah. No, exactly. And I had so much fun, and thank you so much for having me on and stuff. And that's kind of what I want to do on TikTok too. That's why I'm on TikTok, is to connect with readers. And that's, as indie authors, that's what we have to do. That's the only way that we're really going to get our stuff out there. We don't have the big publishing companies pushing out our ads, so we have to connect to our readers. And me and another friend on TikTok, we always say this, you're more inclined to buy an author's book if you feel like you know them a little bit and
absolutely right,
connect with them. So and I'm super open and friendly, so if anybody sees me on TikTok out in the street, say hi. I'm going to want to connect and tell you my stories and just have a good time and all that stuff. That's why my tagline on TikTok is like bookies and besties. I created this whole community on TikTok for people who loves to read and want to connect and with books. So like we're all bookies and besties.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you know, for the viewers that are watching, you know, if you leave a comment down below, if you have questions for Arthur, have questions for me, we'd love to hear them. You know, answer them. If anything about our books or what we're writing on, please leave that down below. Definitely subscribe and hit the notification so you meet all these amazing authors and talented authors that are coming up. And again, thank you, Arthur, for coming on today. I really did enjoy this, and thank you to viewers for watching.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Goodbye.
Bye.